Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Samantha Leighanne and I talk about books. Today we are going to be talking about both my favorite non-horror books of 2020 as well as my most disappointing reads of 2020. So I have 8 of each of them, which is 16. So we just better go ahead and jump right into this because I know that you guys don't want to be here all day. So we're going to start with my favorite non-horror books. First book that I'm going to talk about is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I have really enjoyed Taylor Jenkins Reid's books that I have read, which I've only read 2, actually, now that I think about it. But I will say this, Daisy Jones should be listened to as an audiobook. And the reason for that, if you, for some reason, are unfamiliar with the plot of this book, it is told in a series of interviews and tabloid entries about a band and their rise to stardom and the group dynamics that led to their demise after their stardom was achieved. So it was a book that I really enjoyed, and I honestly didn't expect to like it as much as I did, but I don't know, just the way that Taylor Jenkins Reid writes, it's just, she pulls at my heartstrings in a way that a lot of other authors cannot. Again, with the content of this book, I really wasn't expecting to love it as much as I did, but like there were moments where I teared up. But I also think that it's really important to listen to the audiobook because it does have different narrators. So it's, to me, I feel like it would have been a little bit easier to like really differentiate the different voices in the book that way versus reading them on a page. And a lot of other people have said that as well. So, but I really, really loved it. I want to read more books by her, but I have to be in such a mood for contemporary like that I just haven't yet. So the next book that I am going to talk about is Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. This is the first book in her Pattern Master series. I picked this up on a whim because I had it in my Audible library. I had like gotten it on sale for forever ago, and something about it really appealed to me. I actually read this after I read My Soul to Keep by Tanana Reeb-Dew. And this feels very similar in a lot of ways because you have 2 main characters, Doro, and I cannot remember her name. It is escaping me right now. Both of them are immortal beings, sort of, in different respects. Anyanwu is her name. It just dawned on me. Doro is somebody who can like shapeshift. He can take different bodies through a certain process. And then Anyanwu, she's not immortal, but she lives for a very long time. And I think that she can take the form of different animals. So she is a shapeshifter as well, just in a different respect. And Doro finds her and is like, I have to have her. Like, she can create this bloodline with me. And Anyanwu has never been afraid of anyone until she met Doro. And this is kind of the story of, you know, like their relationship and, you know, how things, I guess, went down between the 2 of them. It's really hard to describe what this book is like. I'm really struggling to like do it justice, but saying that, I don't want people to think that it's like not accessible or that it's not like easily understood, because it really is. It's definitely obviously in the realm of like science fiction / fantasy, as well as like almost historical fiction, because we start in, I think, the 1300s or 1400s up until like making it over into the New World. And she discusses a lot of different things, gender roles, racial issues. It opens your eyes to a lot of things and discusses things in a very accessible way. You know, it's entertaining, but it still makes you think, but it's very nuanced. I'm not explaining this very well. It's a really fucking good book and you need to read it. It's another one of those stories that, much like the series, the African Immortal series with Tanana Reeb-Dew, that I have thought about a lot. And I also read Dawn by her, which is a totally separate series because, again, it was something that I had in my library, and that one is like purely science fiction. It's about recolonization of the earth and aliens and things. And oh my God, I loved it. And I've thought about that story a million times, and I've thought about this story a million times. It was one of those things that's like really stuck with me. And I don't have that happen all that often in terms of series. So I love the fact that I have a couple different series that I am really looking forward to revisiting. So the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Power by Naomi Alderman. And this book was so interesting. This is another book that discusses gender roles. So this is a book that takes the current societal structure that we have and completely turns it over on its head. And it makes you wonder, what if men were no longer in the positions of power that they were in? Like, what if women overtook those roles? And it is extremely, extremely interesting to really think about that. It was written in a very thought-provoking way, but it was also very entertaining. You have different women from different backgrounds, you know, like racially and financially, different areas of the world. And, you know, like seeing how this change in the balance of power has really affected them, and, you know, what they choose to do with that. It's very, very interesting. So again, another one of those books that is entertaining, but it's also extremely thought-provoking as well. You know, and it starts out in this whole balance of power, it starts out being such a positive thing, and then it goes further into not just gender roles, but, you know, like humans as a whole. And just, I'm doing a very poor job of like doing things justice here in these videos, but just extremely thought-provoking, and that was really entertaining, and I really, really enjoyed it. The next book on this list is Kindred, also by Octavia Butler, and I really loved this one, and parts of it were really, really hard to read. You have a Black woman who is suddenly being snatched backwards through time to colonial America, where slavery is still very real, and her trying to figure out, number one, how that happens, what her purpose is, and really navigating her current situation and really learning how to navigate that time period while still maintaining who she is. Both her and her husband, I believe, study history. And so they are both very aware of the key players and key events during those time periods. And eventually her husband does end up back in time with her as well. But again, there are parts of it that are very, very hard to read. But again, the way that she discusses race, and not just race, but again, gender issues as well. She does it in such a way where, again, you are thoroughly entertained. However, it's really thought-provoking, but it's also really difficult to read at times. But I do feel like it's also a really important book. If you consider yourself a fan of science fiction in any way, shape, or form, and this is a book that you haven't read, like, I need you to add this to your list right now. I'm not the biggest science fiction fan, if we're being completely honest, but that book was, after reading that, I wanted to devour everything from Octavia Butler. And I've read several more of her books, which I've already talked about, but she's just such a great writer, and that book I feel like is so important. So if for some reason you haven't read it, you really should. The next book I'm going to talk about is a more lighthearted entry, and that is Fried Green Tomatoes and the Whistle Stop Cafe by Fannie Flagg. And I'm sure that all of you have seen the film. Not all of you. I'm sure a lot of you have seen the film Fried Green Tomatoes, and I love that film with all my heart. And I also really, really loved the book. The book, I think, does things justice in a way that the film doesn't, but they are both equally wonderful in their own right. I really love that we got a little bit more personal insight into the characters in the book through the writing than we did through the film. But the story itself, I just feel like, is so, so good. You guys, I really, really loved that book. And I really loved the movie, and I really want to watch the movie again. And honestly, I feel like it's probably a book that I'll end up rereading as well. So next book that I'm going to talk about, there is a theme in most of my favorite books that I read, and that's that they were able to make me feel things. And this book made me feel things in a way that I cannot adequately describe. And that is The Heart's Invisible Furies by John Boyne. And unfortunately, after reading this book and gushing about it and loving it as much as I did find out that the author is an absolute shithead. And so while this was one of the best books that I have ever read, I cannot in good conscience say go out and read this book because I don't want you to put money in his pockets. And I did get rid of all of the books that I owned by him just because I can't. I'm not going to go into like the details if you want to know anything about, you know, like where he stands or what he stands for. Like, the internet is free. This is a story of a gay man, an adopted gay man, navigating his way through, you know, his identity, family, you know, embracing who he is. And it's told like through different periods of his life. So you get like these key experiences in his life as you go through the book. You start out early in his life and you go through different areas, and you start to see as you go through this book how things are interconnecting and how people are interconnecting. And by the time I got to the end, I read the book and I cried while I was reading it. And thinking about it is also like giving me weird emotions. Like, this year has been weird, you guys. Like, I'm not normally any type of emotional person, and I think that it's just like the memory. You know, I was telling my husband about this book because he's sweet and he asks about the books that I'm reading, even though he doesn't read. I was telling him about it and I got to the end, and the end was the hardest part, you know, as everything kind of came together. And I could hardly talk. I was crying so much, like the second time around. And I have tears in my eyes right now, like remembering what that felt like and remembering how that book made me feel. And I'm so upset that I can't tell you to run out and go buy that book right now because the author's a piece of shit. Like, that upsets me more than you even know, because this book was incredible. And it was so dramatic. And I read it with a group of friends, and like we were messaging each other as we were reading it, going like, oh my God, this is fucking crazy. You know, because like everybody is just so dramatic, and it felt like this crazy sitcom. And there were parts of it, that were totally predictable, but just, I loved everything about it. It felt authentic. And I am sad that I cannot sit here in good faith and recommend it. But it doesn't change the fact that I so fucking loved that book. So fucking loved it. The last book that made me cry like that was The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, if that tells you anything. Like, that book made me ugly cry. And I don't know if it's just where my headspace was as well whenever I was reading it, like where I was at that point in my life, because again, this year has been real weird, real weird, and my emotional state has been all over the place. So I don't know if my reaction speaks to where I was at in my life, but I feel like other people had similar reactions too. So I don't feel like it's necessarily that. I think that it was just like a good fucking book. But I loved it, but don't go buy it because don't support that person. But okay. And the next book that I'm going to talk about is The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This was my first Toni Morrison book, and it was another one of those. I've had this book on my shelf forever, and it's time for me to finally read it. And that book absolutely, completely, utterly destroyed me. I will say that you definitely have to be in the right frame of mind to read that book. It's hard to believe that The Bluest Eye was actually Toni Morrison's first novel, and I did not know that until after I had already read it. It felt like, you know, she'd been writing books for years. Her prose is just beautiful, and the way that she is able to like conjure emotion is second to none. There are a lot of trigger warnings for that novel. It is about 11-year-old, I think she's 11 or 12, Piccola Breedlove. She prays that her eyes will turn blue like white children so that she will be loved like white children. And everything about this book is very, very heavy. And like I said, I stood in the kitchen. This is another one that I listened to on audio, and I distinctly remember standing at the counter in the kitchen and sobbing as I got to the end, because it was very hard. It's very layered, the way that she writes. It's not something that it takes time to get through her work. And it took me time to get through this book because I had to keep stopping, because I had to keep processing. It was very important for me to make sure that I took it all in, because again, the subject matter was so important. It deals most specifically with race and anti-Blackness, and it is so powerful and so important. But know that going into it, it's incredibly hard to read. You know, not only does it talk about anti-Blackness, as I said, but it also, like I said, I had to keep stopping to process, because it talks about, like, you know, the cycle of abuse and poverty and just so many other things. But it's incredible and it's incredibly important. And I know that I want to read all of her other work, but I know that in order to do that, I'm going to have to be in the right headspace to do it. But it's incredibly worthwhile to read. It's incredibly important. So I can't recommend it enough. Just, again, bear in mind the subject matter is extremely triggering. You know, you're talking about child abuse and sexual assault and things of that nature. It's very, very hard to read, but it's definitely worth it. And the last book that I'm going to talk about is The Last Victim by Jason Moss. This is actually a nonfiction, but it was like really fucking good. And it was, again, like really powerful to me, especially knowing that the author actually committed suicide. This was the only book that he ever wrote. I went on a true crime kick in November and the beginning of December. I could not get enough true crime. While I was getting my hair done, having a conversation with my stylist, who is an absolutely phenomenal person and did an amazing job on my hair. So I was talking to my stylist, and I had mentioned that I was really into true crime, and she's like, oh my God, I have a book recommendation for you. And I was like, yes, give it to me. And so Jason Moss undertook a project where he started corresponding with serial killers who were on death row. And he actually corresponded with several different ones. Charles Manson, Richard Ramirez. He actually did write back and forth with Jeffrey Dahmer a few times before he was killed in prison. But the one that he mainly corresponded with was John Wayne Gacy. And not only did he correspond with John Wayne Gacy, he actually had the opportunity to go and visit him in prison. I had to keep reminding myself as I was reading this book that this was someone's real experience, that these things did actually happen to him. The way that he got these people to write back to him was he researched them and then posed himself as if he were someone who would have become their ideal victim. And so he, again, corresponded back and forth, especially with John Wayne Gacy. And I had actually just finished a book about John Wayne Gacy whenever I picked this up. And so I was very familiar with him and his crimes. And the experience that Jason Moss had, especially during their visit, was absolutely horrifying. And, you know, throughout the writing of this book, Jason Moss kept saying that, you know, he was the one that was in control, and then gradually began to realize that he wasn't. That in a lot of ways, he was definitely Gacy's last victim. Because I think that the process and all of the things that he endured and the things that he talked about and the things that he learned, I think that a lot of that, I know that a lot of that had way more of an impact on him than the author originally intended. But to watch those things unfold, again, I had to keep reminding myself, because it reads like fiction, and I love nonfiction that reads like fiction, but I had to keep reminding myself that this was somebody's real experience. And so, like, it was incredible. I loved it. 5 stars. It was extremely insightful, especially in the ways that people manipulate, because, you know, the author thought that he was the one doing the manipulating, when in fact he wasn't. It was, you know, the killers themselves who were still, you know, had the upper hand. So it was, it was definitely a very, very intense and very horrifying read in a lot of different ways, but it was still really good. So if you're a fan of true crime and you haven't read that, like, I definitely recommend it, but just know it is intense. Okay, so we are going to switch gears now, and we are going to talk about my least favorite books. I'm not going to use the phrasing worst, because it's not the worst. They just did not work for me. And a couple of these are probably going to be like a little bit controversial for a couple of different reasons. But again, I've got 8 books here, so we're just going to jump right into it. I'm not going to talk about plot synopsis. I don't know if you noticed, but I haven't been talking about plot synopsis. I'm just going to talk about why these books didn't work for me. So let's go ahead and get into this section. The very first book that I'm going to talk about, and I don't have copies of any of these books because I have unhauled all of them. The very first book is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Everybody fucking loves this book, and it did not work for me. I was reading it going, okay, when am I going to like this? Like, when am I going to like this? Everybody loved it, and I thought it was absolute utter garbage. I fucking hated that book, honestly. There was not a single likable character, and to be fair, I've read a lot of books that I loved that had unlikable characters. That doesn't necessarily mean that I'm not going to like that book, but nobody had any redeeming qualities. It was basically like this like wine fest for people who have money. I'm gonna be real with you. I couldn't tell you exactly what the plot is anymore. I'm pretty sure they killed someone. They killed one of their friends, that's right. So everyone was terrible, so I wasn't really able to connect with the characters. Like, it was a woe is me, oh my god, my life is so hard, let me like drink all the fucking time, and I just couldn't deal. I could not deal. Like, I had gone in and I had read If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and I loved that book. I thought it was great, and so I was really thinking that this was going to be similar to that because I had heard the two compared, and they were not. The Secret History, not a fan. I would not ever recommend it to anyone. But I say I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but like, y'all make your own decisions. But it was not for me at all. The next book on my list is Dead Letters by Caite Dolan-Leach. And this is a story about a girl who has a twin sister. I'm fairly certain it's her twin. I think it's her twin. And her mother was having like mental health issues. And she like moved away forever ago, and then she starts getting like emails from her sister. Her sister died. I don't remember. I just remember that I did not like that book. Again, with the unlikable characters, everything felt really pointless, and we use mental health as plot devices, which I don't love. That is one of my least favorite plot devices. But it just wasn't like the story as a whole just wasn't very compelling. I was not impressed by any stretch with anything that happened in that book. The next book that I really did not enjoy was Unholy Messenger, The Life and Times of the BTK Serial Killer. And the reason that I didn't like this, and this is purely like my own personal shit, right? The reason that I did not like this is because they framed the whole serial killer thing and in talking about him, they framed it around his religion and like how that affected him. And they talked a lot about the church and how it affected the church and how it affected the people of the church, which is fine. Like, that's totally valid. I'm not a religious person, and so subsequently I was not at all, which I don't know what I was expecting since the title was Unholy Messenger, but I just figured it was referencing the fact that he was caught by the church or like using the equipment at the church. I don't know, but I was so unimpressed with that book. And not only that, like, I found that it gave almost no insight at all, because the whole reason that I enjoy reading true crime, especially about serial killers, is getting that bit of insight into the psyche or thought process or what have you about serial killers. Whoever it is that we happen to be talking about at that particular time. And I don't feel like this book offered that at all in any capacity. I am sure maybe somebody who is super religious may be able to find something about it that they like, but it just wasn't for me. So the next one is Burying the Honeysuckle Girls. This is another one that uses mental health as a plot device, and so subsequently I was not about it. This is about a younger girl. She's in her early 20s, and she's kind of estranged from her family, and her family is in the political spotlight. They're Southern. Her dad, I think, is like running for a governorship or something in politics. And her mother died at a very young age. While she was very young, I should say. And her whole life, she's tried to figure out what happened to her mother. And she thinks that it's like this family curse. That when she turns 21, she's gonna like lose her fucking shit or something like that. I can't remember. Family secrets, they make it seem like it's like something supernatural, and it's not. It's just people had mental health issues, and I just didn't appreciate the way that those things were handled. Not to mention, our main character I didn't feel any sympathy towards her situation. Which maybe that's just me and the fact that I'm cold-hearted, I don't know. But subsequently, it was really hard for me to like really connect with the story and with the characters. So I didn't love it. The next one is The Acolyte by Nick Cutter. I think that I've read most things that Nick Cutter has written. And this one is like kind of horror, kind of not. And it has to do with, I read this book towards the beginning of the year, so I'm doing real good to remember anything that it was about. I just remember that I really didn't like it. Again, because of the religious connotation. Like, I get what he was trying to do. He was definitely trying to do some kind of like, I guess maybe satire, commentary on religion, like that sort of thing. But I could not have given a shit less about any of the characters or anything that really happened in the book. He just really failed to grab me from the beginning, which is really unfortunate because I've loved pretty much every other book that I've read. And I do feel like I'm in the minority in the fact that I didn't love that book, but it just didn't work for me. I think that I've come to the conclusion that most things that have a religious undertone are just something that I am not about. So, you know, that's why it didn't work for me. But like, if you are religious, you might actually enjoy it. So the next book that we're going to talk about is The Girl from Blind River by Gale Massey, I think it is. This was the first book that I read in 2020 and I didn't like it. It's about a girl whose mother has been in and out of jail and they come from like a poor area and she's like trying to save her brother, but they're caught up in like this gambling thing and like it is very not compelling. Like all of these things happen to this character, but never once did I care that they happened to her. The author failed to make me give a shit. That's really what it comes down to. He failed to make me give a shit. And as you saw in the previous section where I can talk about a book that I loved and like literally tear up because I loved it so much, you really have to make me feel something. Like if you can't make me feel something, you can just go. Like I've written you off, I'm done. So yeah, I was not impressed with that book whatsoever. The next one I'm going to talk about is The White Road by Sarah Lotz. And I got this one from the library. It had decent reviews, so I picked it up and I was like, okay, cool. And I did not like it. First of all, you made me think that it was going to be like in the mountains and snowy. And part of it did take place in those places. Don't get me wrong. Because I picked this book because I was like, oh, okay, like it's winter. Like I want something that gives me like that wintry vibe. But I also wanted something that was supposed to be like horror, right? And this was not horror. This was suspense. Don't get me wrong. It was definitely suspense, but I wouldn't call this horror at all. You have a kid who like goes, what is it called? Cave splunking. Is that the word? I feel like I don't know what the word is. I'm afraid to say any other word because anyway, he's going exploring caves and he goes with this guide and, you know, while he's going with this guide, things happen and he almost loses his life in this cave and subsequently ends up in a very bad situation, suffering from PTSD. Then he ends up on a mountain and also bad things happen. And then he comes home from the mountain, goes to climb Everest, right? And then he comes home from climbing Everest and loses his shit and then goes back to the cave. And it's like, you also introduced this whole idea of this almost like supernatural occurrence and then you just like didn't deliver anything about it. You like, it just wasn't good. I was not impressed. And also, again, I hated the characters that were in the book. Like nobody was good. So, and the very last book that I'm going to talk about, and this book is honestly probably my least favorite book that I read the entire year, and that is The Listener by Robert McCammon. I am fairly certain that this was my first experience with Robert McCammon, and I was extremely disappointed. This is also a book where I had gone and I read the reviews of people that I trust, in terms of, like, I don't usually read reviews before I read a book, but I'll look at like, oh, okay, this person rated it this person rated it this, like, oh, okay, like these are people whose opinions that I trust. And this is not to say that they are wrong, but I'm going to tell you why this book didn't work for me. and why it was very interesting to me that so many people glazed over these facts. I did see some reviews after I finished the book who pointed these things out, and I was like, thank God that somebody is seeing these things, because I was floored that it wasn't included in more of the reviews. So the basic synopsis of this book is you have a young girl who has been kidnapped for ransom by some people who don't really matter to anything. And she ends up being saved by a young black man. And the reason that she's saved by him, and the reason that I point out his race, is because of the story in and of itself. She's saved by a young black man, but they have this thing going in between the two of them, which is basically Shining. It's The Shining, right? They can converse in their heads together. And it's this little white girl from a rich family that he's saving. So you already have like a lot of, and by the way, I also want to point this out. One of the things that I think we do a lot of times is we read classic books or older books through a modern lens. And you can't always do that. I talk about this a lot whenever I'm talking about Stephen King, especially whenever we read his books written in the 70s and the 80s. In those particular books, you can see a lot of racist language. Those things at that time were par for the course. Can we call them what they are today? 100%. We absolutely need to point those things out. However, when you are writing a book in 2017, using the language that you use, regardless of the fact that it takes place in an earlier time, there are ways to explore those ideas and to explore racism without being so overtly racist. And this shit was atrociously racist. I was actually actively disgusted while I was reading this book. And you had all of these tropes that just had absolutely no place in this at all. So you had the magical black person trope, right? Which appears in Stephen King's The Shining, because Dick Halloran is the magical black person who like tries to come in and save the day. That book was written in the 70s. So again, you have an older book through a modern lens. This was written in 2017. You had no business writing that. You had no business writing it in the language that you did. Like, this black person has to come in and sacrifice themselves for this little rich white girl. Why? It was gross. I did not like anything about it. The villains were like throwaway characters. Like, the way that he established that the villains were villains was he killed a puppy because he got mad. Why? There are a million other ways that you could have shown that, but that's how you chose to show it. And so I was turned off from that at the very beginning, but as we went through the story and I started seeing all of these other elements, I was like, oh no. No. And I hate that too, because there are a lot of books that McCammon has written that people say are absolutely amazing. And there are books of his that I want to read. But after that experience, I am really hesitant to pick up any more of his works, because again, like I want to know what editor sat down and said, this is fucking gold, because read The Room, read the motherfucking Room. It was not good at all. Clearly I have feelings on it. I do not recommend it at any, and I was so disappointed. And then going through and like reading all of these 5-star reviews, I'm like, did I read the same book? Am I making a big deal out of nothing? But no, I really don't think that I was. It really was just absolutely ridiculous level of just gross that was in that book. I was not impressed. I hated it. That's it. Point blank. 0 out of 10 stars. Do not recommend. Like, I can't. I don't know if I gave that book 2 stars or 1 star, but I hope that I gave it 1 star. And those are my favorite non-horror books and least favorite books that I read in 2020. Sound off in the comments below. Did you like any of these books? Did you read any of these books? Did you also agree, and did you not enjoy some of these books? Keep in mind, the books that I did not enjoy, I'm not saying that they were bad. And I'm not saying that you're wrong if you like those books. And it's really sad that I even have to say these things, but I'm going to say it, because I'm not trying to have y'all in my comments like coming after me because I didn't enjoy a book that you enjoyed. You are 1,000,000% entitled to your own opinion. And that's not to say that, again, because I didn't enjoy it, there are reasons that they work for some people. There's reasons that they don't work for some people. And I just told you the reasons that they did not work for me. So that's it. That's all I'm going to say as far as disclaimer for that. But like I said, sound off in the comments below. Let me know what you thought of any and all of these books. If you are new here, hi, hello, and welcome. If you like what you see and you want to see more, you can click thumbs up. You can click subscribe if you haven't already. And you can also click the little notification bell for notifications on when I do upload. So yeah, but that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will see you guys in my next video, which should be my overall statistics. So I will see you guys next time. Bye.